Hello and welcome. How to add a subcontroller to an ATRIUM system and the process of doing that. And we'll show you how to do that through the software. There's already, if you're familiar with our product, at our website on cdvi.ca. Once you're logged into our website, it is a secured website to be allowed to go to the download center. And I just want to give you a quick heads up here if you weren't aware of this. In the download center, we do have some videos, and the subject matter that we're discussing today, adding a subcontroller, is already recorded. Is already a recorded video for that. So in the download center, Atrium section, you go to the videos, and there are several different videos in this here, including the one that I'm pointing at here, creating a master and a subcontroller. So the task that we're up to today, we're going to be doing it through the Atrium software to show you how it's done that way. But if ever you need to, you can always refer to our download center to see how it's done in the web interface. Same task, different way of doing things. So just to give you a heads up, that's available for you anytime you need it. And just a matter of going out and logging in to access that information. Okay, so for today, it's in the software that we're going to be doing this, and let's get right to it. And we'll also be discussing once the process, I'll show you how it's done in the software here. And after that, the bonus content that I want to put forward here that is mentioned in the invitation with a webinar is to discuss the differences between a master controller, a subcontroller, and door expanders. So we'll give you a whole roundup of the different options available to you with these different terms, if you will, or objects in the system. So, okay. Let's get a subcontroller added to an existing system. To be able to add a subcontroller to a system, you need to have a master controller. Now, the master controller is the one that I connect to, and once I log into the master controller, it will then, through the master, if I'm adding a card, it'll push the new card out to each individual subcontroller that's in the system. That's done automatically. But the connection is not made to each subcontroller. It's made to the master, and the master then distributes that information to all the subcontrollers it has in its configuration. So let's get that concept on board here. The master controller, right now, I do not have a master controller. What I'm in right now is in, of course, the Atrium software. I'm in the hardware tab in the system overview. I have an existing system. It's a two-door system with one A22 controller, A22K, the crypto controller. By highlighting this, I can see the different database tree. And just to make sure we're on the up and up here, we have two doors on this particular controller. Now, this controller, I will not be adding expanders to. I will want to add a subcontroller. So in order to add a subcontroller, as I mentioned, we need to have a master. So this first controller, we're going to configure as a master, and it's quite simple to do. It's a matter of going into the controller's menu, the module interface for that particular menu. So the A22K here, I've highlighted it. You can either highlight and go to properties or simply double click on the controller in question. And here we are in the controller menu. Now our task here is to set this controller as a master controller. To be able to do that, to activate this option, is in the advanced options and in the integration tab. So I want to make this a master controller. This is the option that I'll enable. So before I do that, just to give you a visual, differentiating whether or not, a couple of things. So I'll just come back here in a second. So in the controller section here, I see my controller. When I go to the connection properties, when I added that controller, here's the connection properties, and it sees the IP address of my controller. Now, what I want to bring your attention to is this area here. The subcontroller's IP clients is deactivated. It's shaded out, if you will. I cannot add a subcontroller. That's because my existing controller is not set as a master. Once it's set as a master, this, when I come back to the connection properties, will allow me to add subcontrollers. So we got to get that master set up. So let's go back into the controllers menu, into, as when we saw earlier, the advanced options, the integration tab, and set the controller to a master controller and save. Now, what this will do, the controller has now activated this option, and to implement the option, the controller will reboot. So you notice that it is offline. It'll take about a minute or so before the controller comes back online. Once the controller has come back online, I want to bring your attention to where we see offline here for this particular controller. You'll see the word master in bold lettering indicated beside the actual controller serial number. So in a couple moments here, we should be able to see that for you. And once that is set, then we'll be able to add subcontrollers to our system. Now, with the ATRIUM system, it's a 500 door system. You can have one master and up to 49 subcontrollers connected to that system. Each one of these, so we have one master plus 49 subcontrollers, and they each do 2 doors, so you can do up to 100 doors. Now, each of these controllers have the capability to add 4 door expanders, to have a total of 10 doors, 10 readers per controller in the system. So for a grand total of, for each controller, 10 doors, we have a total of 50 controllers, one master, 49 subcontrollers, for a total of 500 doors. However, you do not need to, it is not a prerequisite to maximize the first controller before I can add a second controller. So I don't have to have a master with 4 expanders before I can add a subcontroller. If I want, I can have a complete IP-based solution with 100 doors, so one master and 49 subcontrollers. With the bonus content that I'll be showing you in a few minutes here, once we're done this process, I'll explain the differences between why I should do a master. Of course, we're seeing that right now. What's the difference between a subcontroller and a door expander? And we'll try and tie all that up in a nice little bow for you guys. So when you're working with this product, you'll be able to make the appropriate decisions according to the needs of the actual project that you're dealing with. So it's now become a master controller. It's online and it's synchronizing. I keep an eye on the label down here online. You'll see updating and so on and so forth. So once we're up and online and communicating, it is now set and ready to go. So this controller has now become a master. And to add a subcontroller, I'll go to the connection properties. And you'll notice that now I have the ability to add a subcontroller. And very simple, very straightforward at this point. You just click on the add button. At this point, this controller is now, you've connected to the network, it's powered up and so on and so forth. So we're going to have the ATRIUM system detect that controller. And here it is. And we highlight it and select the controller. So this is the information for that subcontroller. And we simply click save. It's appearing. And now the data that's in the master controller is now being synchronized on the subcontroller's database. So all the information is being sent to this new subcontroller in the system. So as far as adding subcontrollers, that is the complete process. It'll synchronize, and that'll take a few moments to get the task done. And at that point, once it's back online and all the synchronization is done, you'll see that we now have 4 doors on this system. So very simple, setting the master, that's the first controller, going into the properties for that controller, and then setting it as a master, as we saw before in the advanced options. Since it's still synchronizing, there's certain menus that are deactivated at this point. So we're still synchronizing the data on the system. Here we go. And then the integration tab is now a master controller. Once that has been set up, I then go to the connection properties, and the capability to add subcontroller is now activated. And we can have up to 49 subcontrollers connected on one system to one master. Okay, so if I go to my dashboard now, for example, and I go to the doors menu, I now see that I have my 4 doors, 2 for each controller. These are not expanders. It's a master and subcontroller. So that process is very simple, very straightforward. Um, and that's all that's involved in adding subcontrollers. Once the controller has been added, the system will automatically synchronize the database from the master controller and upload it, if you will, into the new subcontroller in the system. Now, as far as the actual mechanics of doing a subcontroller, adding a subcontroller, we've covered the whole process. So it's very simple, very quick to accommodate these different needs. Now, with that said, let's get into the bonus content option here, and I think I'll have several important pieces of information that will be useful to you regarding this. So what we're looking at here is a slide that I use in one of my PowerPoint presentations, and it's a representation of a 100 door ATRIUM system. And of course, to bring it up to 100 to 500, you just multiply this by 5. So what we're looking at is we have our network. There's a switch, and we have on this particular screen capture, if you will, we have 10 controllers that are connected. So 5 here and 5 here that are all connected to the local area network through the switch. So each of these controllers has an IP address, if you will. Now, there is one of these that is the master, and in this case, we have 9 subcontrollers. Okay. Now, each of these controllers has the capability to add 4 door expanders. Okay, or maximum capacity per controller of 10 readers, if you will, or 10 doors. Okay. Now, explain this process of a master and so on and so forth. So when I have one controller, I can have 4 expanders on it, and I can do up to 10 doors. I do not have to have a master controller because one controller can accommodate 4 expanders. Once I go beyond that, I then must, if I have 4 expanders already on my first controller, add a subcontroller. However, I can, if I want, if I have a system that is less than 100 doors, eliminate or not use any door expanders on the system and only use door controllers themselves as either one master and subcontrollers. So bits of information. When I connect to the system, just to make sure we understand correctly, I have multiple controllers here. I have a 100 door system. When I log into the system and I add a card, when I enter my login ID and username, my password, I'm connecting to the master controller. Okay. Now the master controller will then, if I add a card, when I click save, will send the copy of that data to each subcontroller in the system. Okay. So there's a complete copy of the system database, the doors, your cards, your schedules, your access levels, and even an event buffer on each controller that is either a master or a subcontroller. Now, each master and subcontroller can house a total of 25,000 events. So if a controller, whether a subcontroller, for example, happens to go offline, someone disconnected the patch cable, the network cable, for whatever reason, the switch failed, the controller is offline, it has a complete copy of the system database. These schedules will continue functioning as per what was programmed when the system lost communication with it. Whatever was there at the time of the failure continues to function 100%. Of course, if I want to add or change something, I need to reestablish communication with that particular panel. I have to correct the issue that I'm dealing with. However, what was there when the failure occurred continues functioning. Okay, so all the cards, all the access levels, all the unlock schedules, anything that the system uses on a day-to-day basis will continue functioning. So we have a complete copy of the database, so on each subcontroller of the system. Now, the difference between the master and subcontroller, excuse me, is simply the fact of which one do I connect to. A couple things that I could put forward for you regarding the master controller. Now, the master controller, as we saw in the software, is nothing more than an option that we enable, that we activate in the controller's menu. Then we can add subcontrollers and so on and so forth. One of the things that I might put forward as a recommendation is your master controller will have multiple tasks to take care of. So the default task by design is it controls 2 doors and it controls its own database internally on the board level itself. However, now we're asking it to do not only that, but we're asking it also to manage the master controller, to manage its subcontrollers, its door expanders, in addition to managing up to 49 subcontrollers. So we're asking the master controller to do multiple tasks, and we're giving it a lot of load, if you will. One of the things that you could, when you're planning your install, if you can, this is not a requirement, but if you can, by planning your install, the master controller, since it has so much additional functionality that it needs to keep up to with its 49 subcontrollers and all the doors on those and so on and so forth, is to try and liberate, if you will, some of the task of the controller, the master controller. One of the thing is the master controller has its 2 readers. If these 2 doors that are on the master controller, what I recommend is maybe put the readers for this particular master controller on a door that does not have that much traffic. Don't put it on the employee entrance door where 4,000 employees come in and out of that door on a every shift. So this would be a lot of work for the panel. Let's give it a little bit of breathing room, and that door that has 4,000 we'll put on a subcontroller. That way we'll liberate the task that the master has to be able to manage all of that stuff. So trying in a nutshell, try and keep the master controller as light application as possible. Don't give it too much more additional work because you're already asking it to do a lot of work. So one of the things, the master controller, put it on doors that are not too busy in the building. If possible, on the master controller, do not add door expanders. Don't need that. I only have 15 doors to do in this building, and I can get 15 doors to work with simply 8 controllers, 1 master and subcontroller, and I'm done. So that way, we're helping the master to be able to do all the additional tasks that we're asking it to do. So that's one aspect that you can think and put forward when you're putting together your projects. Now, I'd like to maybe explore the differences between a controller, whether it's a master or a subcontroller, and a door expander. Now, on a door expander, it's the same part number, it's the same physical board, it's just a matter of changing a jumper on the control panel itself to change, if you will, the door controller from a controller, the A22 from a controller, to a door expander. So you simply change that jumper onto the EX pins and reboot that controller, and now becomes an expander. When you've done that, the controller that's been set as an expander is now going to be a door expander. So that expander that you've set will communicate through an RS-45 bus to the controller you're going to connect it to. It is not connected through an IP port on the network. So all the expanders are connected to the controller they're associated to. So one controller can accommodate 4 door expanders, and that's on an RS-45 bus. Use network type cable, Cat5 or Cat6, to establish that communication, and the cable run from the controller out to the overall distance of the loop, if you will, on the expander bus, the door expander, is a maximum of 4,000 feet, 1,220 meters. So you can have a 4,000 foot cable run to accommodate the 4 door expanders. Okay, So now we know how to connect an expander. Now, what's the difference between an expander and the master, an expander and the subcontroller, and so on and so forth? In this particular scenario, whether it's an expander on a master or an expander on a subcontroller, uh, the functionality of the door expander will remain the same. The fact that it's a master or a subcontroller does not change the concept of how a door expander will function. Now, with that said, now the expanders do not have a copy of the system database. They refer to, so if I put an example forward here, scenario, when I swipe my card at the reader on the first door expander, the card number is read by the panel, the expander, and sent to the controller it's connected to. Okay. On the controller itself, you have the card database and so on and so forth, and the access decision is made at the controller level and then sent back to the expander to either grant or deny access according to the card's access rights. This is done in milliseconds. The end user has no, the person actually holding the card cannot decipher whether he's at an expander door or a master door or a subcontroller. All of this is invisible to the actual card holder. So with that said, now this card has been granted or denied access. If it's been granted access at that door expander, on each reader port, the door expander will keep a temporary database, if you will, or temporary copy of the card number. And I'll explain why this is done. So for each reader on the expander, for each card that has been granted access at reader 1, we will store up to 500 card numbers in the expander's minuscule, if you will, database. Okay. At that same expander on reader 2, the last 500 cards that were granted access will also be stored on that database, on that door expander. So we have 500 cards that were granted access, 500 card numbers loaded on reader 1, and 500 card numbers loaded on reader 2 for a possible, in theory, maximum of 1,000 different card numbers. In reality, that won't happen because people will swipe at either door in typical situations. So with that said, the maximum is 500 access cards numbers in the door expander. And this is for each reader, for each expander. Now, the reason why I'm putting this forward is if there is a communication failure between the door expander and its controller, the door expander will then fall into what we term a standalone mode. Okay, this is an important aspect of differentiating and planning my install. When I do the installation, do I want an expander? What's the advantages? What's the disadvantages? And so on and so forth. So this is part and process of implementing your system. So if the expander has gone offline, what the expander will do is both doors on that expander will lock. So if we happen to have a public access schedule during business hours to unlock those doors to allow people, the visitors and customers, to access that door without having to use a card, we can use an unlock schedule. However, if this door is an expander door and it has now gone offline, someone cut the cable between the expander and the control panel it's connected to, that Cat5 cable, there's a failure. Both doors on that expander will lock down. So the schedule does not exist. There's no unlock schedule. So there are no database, no schedules on the expanders. There are no access levels on the expanders. There are no event buffers on the expanders. So step one, once the expander goes offline, we secure the door. We lock both doors on that expander. Now, what will happen is the 500 cards that were stored with that were granted an access granted previous to the failure will continue functioning. So if I go back to that same door with my card, so let's do a case in point here. I'm an employee. I went to work on Monday morning. I swiped my card at the employee door. It granted me access. This door happens to be a reader that's connected to an expander on the system. So my card number is now stored on that reader port on that particular expander. Lo and behold, a few moments later, the unknown to me, the actual expander went offline. So there is a communication failure. When I go back to that door, I will be able to still use my card. However, the door will unlock when I swipe my card for 5 seconds, but there will no longer be any access control. So my card number is valid. The door will unlock, but it will unlock 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's no restriction. There's no access restrictions. There's no access levels. So we secure the door, but we permit functionality, if you will, but we're no longer restraining or restricting the access to that particular door. If your card is in the 500 card buffer, if you will, on the expander, unlock the door 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So each of the 500 cards that are in each reader port's buffer, if you will, card buffer, will continue functioning for a 7-day period, 24 hours a day. And when I swipe my card on Monday morning, let's say it was 7 o'clock in the morning, so my card will continue functioning at that. I can go back to that same reader in the next 7 days, within 7 days, and it will function once again. And once I go back within that 7-day period, I will reset the timer for that particular card for another 7 days. So for every card that's presented to the reader and it's granted access, because it is in the reader buffer, you reset the time for that particular card that it will continue functioning. So the default value on the expanders is 7 days or 24 hours. Now this can be modified. Okay, so for example, I swipe my card at 7 o'clock in the morning Monday, and I don't go back to that same door for a week. I was on vacation, so on and so forth. When I come back after 7 days, my card will be denied access because it did not go within the 7-day time period. If I go within the 7-day time period, I will reset the timer for another 7 days. Now this will continue for each card on each reader that was in the card buffer, if you will, on the expander. If I go back within 7 days, the card will work again for another 7 days. Now, this value is a default value in the system. And when you have expanders defined in your system, you can go into the expander menu in your software and you can modify that value when it's offline. The offline mode is the term in the expander menu. So the offline mode is good for 7 days, 24 hours a day. You can restrict that or modify that down to a couple hours if you wish, 1 or 2 hours, or you can increase it all the way up to 1 year. So when the system, the expander goes offline, how long will it continue reading the cards that were in its card buffer at each reader? Okay, so an important aspect. So this Cat5 run is a very important, if you put it in conduit, you're minimizing the amount of risk of someone actually cutting or pulling on that wire and causing a communication failure. If the 4-door expanders are located in the same cabinet or the same room, if you will, utility room, and you only have a few inches of wire between each, maybe a meter at maximum between each expander, the risk of the expanders going offline is minimized because there's not that much cable. So a lot of common sense comes into play of what's the actual risk and how do I mitigate that risk of this being a failure, okay, of this being a communication failure on here. Whereas, so if the expander goes offline, we now know how the expander will react. The doors will lock. The last 500 cards of each reader will work for 7 days. In addition, of course, in the system, you'll have an event, module communication failure. This can be flagged to fire an email and so on and so forth. And the 2 readers on that expander at the door will start beeping, chirping, I should say, every 3 seconds, along with a red flash, a red LED flash. This is a visual and audible indicator that there's something not normal at this particular door. So for the end user, they might call you up as a service tech and say, my reader is beeping every 3 seconds and I don't know why. And that is one of the things that when the expander goes offline, both readers will flash red every 3 seconds along with a chirp. So to indicate that there is something not functioning properly at that particular controller or expander, I should say. So if a subcontroller happens to go offline, as I was mentioning a bit earlier, the subcontroller has a complete copy of the system database. So it has its access level. So your access rights, your cards are in the system. It can house up to the system database up to 10,000 cards. So much more functionality if ever there is an issue with the system as far as communication. So there's a complete copy of the database on each subcontroller. So if the subcontroller does go offline, it continues functioning, the schedules continue functioning, the access levels, the cards, and of course the connected expanders on that will continue functioning as they always do. So an important justification of which one do I want to do versus the other. The expanders, for example, why would I want to use an expander? Maybe on my network switch. There are no more ports available in this particular installation. We're adding cameras to the system and so on and so forth. So where the network switch, the IP ports available are restricted, and we want to be able to, for example, uh, in this particular building, in the warehouse and shipping area, the service door to enter by the docking bay, we need to control that door. However, this door, there is no network available. So we could run a Cat5 cable all the way back to that one single cable to the local vicinity of that particular door, install an expander at that door close by, do the field wiring for my reader cable, my lock cable, my door contact request to exit, all locally, minimizing the amount of field wiring I have to do, and then connect that expander to the controller through that Cat5 wire. So you're minimizing the amount of field wiring you're doing. The flip side is if that Cat5 wire happens to go offline, we know now how the expander will work with the last 500 cards. So those are some of the intricacies of the ATRIUM system. If I can maybe give you an overall view, if you will, regarding these aspects. The way I look at it as a trainer and being familiar with this product, if the reader, the door that I'm dealing with, is an important door to the building. Now, what is an important door? There are many things that can mean it's important or not. Some of the things that might be key are if it's a perimeter door on the building. Once you access the building, you're inside, and boy, that's a big thing. Once you're inside, well, yeah, we do have some readers that we want to control. Not everybody can go into the IT room and all that kind of stuff. However, gaining access to the building, so all your perimeter doors can be very important doors. The gate, the employee door, the garage door for the underground parking. All of these are key doors in the building that if these fail, we are going to have issues, some major issues. So I want to mitigate or minimize any failures. So all of these perimeter doors, I would put on controllers, subcontrollers. Okay. The master controller, for example, let's give this a little bit of breathing room to let it do all the tasks it has to do. The two doors on there, the two readers on interior doors that are not as mission critical, if you will. So these are some of the thought processes that I put forward to be able to make my justify what is an expander. Why am I doing an expander? It's because it's convenient. It's only one cable run. It's local to the expander the controller is connected to. The flip side of the coin, well, no, I have in the back of the warehouse, and I have another switch there, and there's plenty of ports. I want to, as much as possible, if ever there is a failure, while the door will continue working, access control will connect the panel as a subcontroller to the master and have it manage the doors there. So this is the type of process that I keep in mind when I'm dealing with these three different object types in the system. A master controller, if I can liberate it from doing its tasks, don't put any expanders on it. Put it on doors that are not too busy in the building. SubControllers give me some redundancy if ever there is a communication failure. The SubController has a complete copy of the database. You can have up to 49 SubControllers, so you can do with the master up to 100 doors, all IP based. Whereas, hey, if I don't have any network capability, I only have one port. I can do up to 10 doors with one network port on the system. So these are the type of situations and um, applications that I delve into, and then I can make my decision accordingly, according to the information I just gave you. So that covers the material that I wanted to do here today for you. So thanks again, and we'll see you guys if hopefully tomorrow at 11:30 for that webinar. Thank you. Bye bye.